This is CNN Breaking News.
This is Piers Morgan Live. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. Tonight, breaking news, and very sad breaking news it is too. The death of an American superstar in every sense. James Gandolfini has died at the age of 51, reportedly of a heart attack while he was travelling in Italy. James Gandolfini did what would have been impossible for most actors, make Americans and the world love a mob boss.
To have my health, to be in this beautiful spot with people that I love, I couldn't ask for more.
It was a role that made him a superstar. Tony Soprano in HBO's The Sopranos. Here's another moment from that classic series.
All right, you know why we're here. So if you have any doubts or reservations, now is the time to say so. No one will think any less of you. Because once you enter this family, there's no getting out. This family comes before everything else.
One of the greatest of all TV characters, perhaps the greatest, that part one, James Gandolfini, 3 Emmy Awards. We have much more tonight on his extraordinary life and career. But I want to begin with Bill Carter. He covers television for the New York Times. He interviewed James Gandolfini and remembers him as a huge talent with no pretensions. Bill Carter, it's a real shock. He was only 51, at the peak of his acting powers. What is your reaction to the death of James Gandolfini?
Well, I have to say I'm really stunned. I did speak to him on many occasions, and he was a warm guy. He was not a great interview because he was sort of reserved, not at all like his character. But full of life. I mean, the guy was just a force, a tremendous physical force, and really a superb talent. I mean, the guy was this performance as Tony Soprano. I mean, it changed television, really. Television has changed dramatically because of this. And really, I think the center point of dramatic acting shifted from movies to television because of him. I mean, he just changed the way people regard television, and actors came to television because they could perform at this level after watching him.
What was interesting about him, I met him a couple of times. He was pretty shy, actually, when you met him in the flesh. Very modest, very reserved in many ways, as you hinted there in terms of interviews, but very, very different to the character he played in The Sopranos. And yet the character became this absolute theatrical tour de force. Where would you rank it, Bill, the character of Tony Soprano in the lexicon of television? I
think it's at the top because I think, television forever was, consumed with creating a lead character who would be, likable. And I think he made this incredibly scary guy, in many ways, extremely likable at the same time. It was a really nuanced performance and fully fleshed out. I mean, he had tremendous vulnerabilities. The whole thing with going to a psychiatrist and torments in his own family and with his mother and his children. It was really a fully fleshed performance. And I don't think we'd ever seen anything like that before, and I don't think we'll ever see anything like it again. I mean, I think we see great performances, but this was a breakthrough. This was a changing performance, and nothing was quite the same in television after this show.
We have a statement just in, actually, from David Chase, obviously the creator of Sopranos. He said he was a genius. Anyone who saw him, even in the smallest of his performances, knows that. He is one of the greatest actors of this or any time. A great deal of that genius resided in those sad eyes. I remember telling him many times, you don't get it. You're like Mozart. There would be silence at the other end of the phone. Deborah and Michael and Liliana, this is crushing. And it's bad for the rest of the world. He wasn't easy sometimes, but he was my partner, he was my brother in ways I can't explain and never will be able to explain. David Chase there, the creator of The Sopranos. Very moving words there, Bill. I mean, yes. I've been struck by the extraordinary outpouring of tributes and grief on Twitter and Facebook. Really, a lot of people seem to have been really affected by this.
Well, this is an amazing story. This show, when it started out, it was an HBO show. No one knew anything about it. It was supposedly about mobsters, but it sounded like an opera show because it was called The Sopranos. And this actor was unknown. No one knew who he was. The show had been rejected by Fox. Had been pitched to them. And here it was, and it suddenly became this most talked about show. It grew to an enormous level. I mean, HBO is only seen in about a third of the television homes in America, and it would have 11 million, 13 million people watching these episodes. It was a cultural phenomenon, and just just drove the talk of television and the entertainment industry for all the years that it was on.
He did a remarkable interview in the Actors Studio, which, if no one's seen it, you should get on YouTube and watch it, because he really was somebody that took the craft of acting incredibly seriously, and he agonized about it, didn't he? I mean, whenever I've read interviews with him, it was this constant pursuit of perfection. He was never happy.
No, and he didn't seem like a very happy guy because of that. He seemed sort of tormented about it. You know, he and Chase did not seem to... I did a double interview with them right before the show ended, and I spent a whole day with them on the set, and he and Chase were like partners, but they did not seem like they were like close friends. It was like he had created this character, and it was almost like he was challenging Chase a little bit to bring out more of this character. I mean, he was a really difficult guy in some ways. I think Chase sort of alluded to that. He had some demons. There's no question about that. But, I mean, he just had an enormous wellspring of talent, and it wasn't because he started out because he wanted to be an actor. I think he'd been a truck driver, until he was like 25 years old. And then he just found this calling, and, boy, he was devoted to it.
What was particularly sad, Bill, is that he was in his second marriage, just had a young baby daughter born last year. And in terms of his acting, he'd moved on from The Sopranos and was taking on big roles. And it just seems to have come at this crushingly awful time, professionally and personally, when he could, I suspect, probably never have been happier.
No, I think that's true. And I think, I think he felt very close to this, new family of his. I think he really had big ideas for things to do. He'd been a star on Broadway after the Sopranos. He picked very interesting roles. He never took the more conventional things. I think he took some smaller roles. You're surprised all of a sudden you see James Gandolfini in a part. He actually accepted a new role in an HBO show that I've seen the pilot for, which was extraordinary, and I was sort of really looking forward to that. It's just a shame to be taken away from, because I think he had years of great performances in him.
Yeah, I mean, he could argue decades even. He's 51 years old. I mean, he was in Zero Dark 30, of course, a hugely successful movie. And in almost every movie that I saw him in, or television show, even outside of The Sopranos, he had this kind of dominant physical presence, didn't he? And personality that came through.
Piers, I've rarely been with a guy who was more physically imposing than this guy. I mean, guys might have been bigger, but this guy was like a building, and he was so big. And he put his arm around me once. I have a picture of him, and it looks like I'm standing next to a mountain. I mean, he was such a physical presence. And in the pilot of Sopranos, Chase told a story about him. He had to, like, at one point, confront Christopher, his nephew, and in the scene, he all of a sudden picked him up physically and threw him completely unexpectedly to Chase, and he was like, "Oh my gosh," because it was perfect to say, "Wow, this is a scary guy. He could be a really scary guy." Physically, he would really intimidate people, which was perfect for that part.
Absolutely. Bill Carter, thank you so much for joining me.
Nice to be with you, Piers.
And for viewers just tuning in, the very sad breaking news of the death of James Gandolfini, the star, of course, of The Sopranos, who's died at the age of 51. He was in Italy, we believe, on a private holiday, and he died today. I want to bring in now CNN's Nichelle Turner and Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who are both in New York. Also, Larry King is on the phone. I want to start with you, Larry. You were at a function in Las Vegas several weeks ago with James Gandolfini. What kind of shape was he in there?
He was in a jovial mood, Pierce. We had a great time. It was a dinner honoring Muhammad Ali. He was a big fan of Ali's, and we were at the same table. It was a big black tie dinner, and he felt really wonderful. He had a marvelous career. He had a successful play on Broadway. He was, the interesting thing about him, Pierce, was that he was a great character actor, and character actors rarely become stars. And The Sopranos made him, of course, a star. But he was a well-versed character actor for years. He did a lot of wonderful films, a lot of plays, very theatrical. And that night he was in a really terrific mood. And they had a big auction of spectacular items. And the guy sitting next to me bid $250,000, I think $275,000 for a cruise to the Mediterranean. And he won the bid. And he said to James, "You want to go with me?" And Gandolfini said, "Yeah, I'll go." He just casually says, "Yeah, I'll go." He was just really good. I think he was smoking a cigar, And he was, of course, really overweight. We don't know what he died of yet. I don't like to speculate, but when you see a guy that size at age 51, no previous things about anything, you would normally think the heart. But the last time I saw him, he was in a great mood.
And tell me, Larry, you interviewed him and you knew him. I always got the feeling with James Gandolfini that the superstar status that came with his role in The Sopranos took him by surprise, and he always slightly struggled with the amazing fame it brought him. Would you go along with that?
I'd agree completely with that. He, as I said, he was a classic character actor, many roles, many diverse roles, hero, villain, comedy, loved comedy. And suddenly, you're given this, you know, we could compare it to Carol O'Connor, Getting All in the Family. Very similar. Another character actor suddenly becomes this huge star in a television show that goes beyond expectations, and suddenly you're thrust on the scene. It's like you never be the same once you have that. Suddenly everybody recognizes you, and you're still the regular guy you always was. And he was a classic regular guy, Pierce. If he was on your show tonight, you'd finish at 10 o'clock, you'd go have a pizza with him. He had no entourage.
Right, that's exactly what I heard about him, yeah. Yeah, very sociable guy. Larry, if you could just...
regular guy.
Larry, if you wouldn't mind just...
said.
Right, Larry, if you wouldn't mind just holding for 1 second. I've got Bob Wright with me now. He's the president of NBC Universal. When The Sopranos debuted on HBO, he publicly lamented the violence in the series, worried it would change television for the worse. And Bob Wright joins me now on the phone. Bob, obviously a devastating day for everyone in the world of acting and television. You knew James Gandolfini well. You were there at the start of The Sopranos. What is your reaction?
Well, I was shocked. He's a young man. Certainly by our current-day standards. My history with the show actually goes back a long time. I was the law secretary to Judge Whipple, the chief federal judge in New Jersey, when we had Sam the Plumber DeKalb County trials in 1970. Many of those trials with the RICO Act were the basis of the stories behind The Sopranos, and I thought Tony and his role... It was so spectacular. It was so real. There was a lot of language. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of things that we couldn't do on broadcast television. And he was a superb actor who made all of that come into our living rooms. And seemingly, with all of that I just said, it was just so well written, so well produced, and he was such a wonderful actor.
The initial concerns were that it may glamorize the mafia, the mob, but actually, as James Gandolfini himself said many times over the years, I remember seeing this in an interview he did, that actually it had almost a reverse effect because they all were pretty depressed, they were all unhappy with their lives. The very thing it wasn't was glamorous.
Well, there's certainly no glamour. You know, his own background was he was a bartender at one time in his own world. So some of the aspects of the show were not that foreign from his his earlier background. Yes, we were. I was concerned that we weren't able to do shows like that, and I was concerned that if we weren't able to produce and write and have shows like that on NBC at the time, that we would be losing contact with a lot of Americans who were going to be interested in this show because I thought the show was so good. So it was a very selfish feeling.
But Bill Carter said earlier that he really felt that The Sopranos completely transformed television. It basically created a whole new way of doing television, which then drew in some of the world's great movie actors and producers and directors to do this kind of stuff on the small screen.
I would agree with that. It also, when you watch the show and you just saw episode after episode, you know, the language and the violence became secondary. The acting was very good. The plots were were so realistic. You felt like you were in it, and you did have a lot of sympathy for the people there. Were not doing that well. You know, they were kind of like low rent mobsters.
Bob Wright, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you very much.
I want to go back to Larry King. Larry, I think as the next few days unravel, there will be a general consensus. I'm already sensing this on Twitter and other social media, that James Gandolfini and his role as Tony Soprano may well have been not just one of the great television characters, but the greatest television dramatic character. What do you think?
Well, it'll be right up there. It's hard to pick what is the greatest, but it was certainly, you can't not include him among the greatest. That he put a stamp on that role that will live forever. That was a very special role. He went right in with it.